The single mom only had $5 for a blind date. The millionaire at the next table watched her and, "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was a rainy Thursday evening in a small corner diner on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign flickered outside, reflecting against the puddles that gathered along the cracked asphalt parking lot. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers mixed with the faint sound of a jukebox that had not been updated in decades. At a corner booth sat a young single mother named Emily. She was nervously smoothing out the wrinkles in her second-hand dress, glancing at the door every few seconds, her heart pounding. Emily had agreed to go on a blind date arranged by her well-meaning neighbor. But the truth was, she only had $5 in her purse. That was everything she could spare after paying rent, daycare, and groceries for the week. She had debated all day if she should even come, but a small voice inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, tonight could change her life. The fluorescent lights above buzzed as she checked the clock on the wall. 15 minutes past 7. She wondered if the man would even show up. Every time the doorbell chimed, her heart leapt, only to sink again when it was just another group of strangers. She ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of black coffee, because she could not risk spending more than she had. She counted the dollar bills twice under the table, hiding them beneath her napkin, her fingers trembling. At the next table, a man in a tailored navy blue suit watched quietly. His presence was commanding, though he kept his posture relaxed, his hand resting on a glass of water instead of the wine list in front of him. His eyes were drawn not to her clothes, not to her worn-out shoes, but to the determined way she straightened her shoulders, even when nervousness threatened to overwhelm her. He noticed how she forced a smile when the waitress checked on her, how she tried to appear composed despite the loneliness in her eyes. Emily's blind date finally arrived, late and unapologetic. He slid into the booth opposite her, already pulling out his phone. Without even looking at the menu, he grumbled about traffic and made a sarcastic comment about her simple dress. Emily's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She tried to hold on to her optimism, but every word he spoke chipped away at her fragile hope. Meanwhile, the man in the navy blue suit kept listening, his jaw tightening at the way she was being spoken to. He had not come here for entertainment. He had come for solitude after another exhausting day of high-stakes meetings. But something about the young mother's quiet dignity stirred something inside him. Emily excused herself to the restroom, gripping her small purse tightly, her throat burning with the sting of tears she refused to shed. She reminded herself that she was strong, that she had survived far worse than a failed blind date. For her little boy at home, she could not crumble now. When she returned to the table, her date had already ordered the most expensive steak on the menu without even asking if she could afford to share. Panic surged inside her chest. $5. That was all she had. How could she possibly handle this? She thought about making an excuse to leave, but humiliation pinned her in place. The man at the next table watched the storm of emotions play across her face. And in that moment, he made a decision that would set both of their lives on an unexpected path. Emily's heart raced as she stared down at the menu her date had tossed aside. The words blurred together because she was not even reading them. All she could see in her mind was the image of 5 $1 bills hidden inside her purse. Her stomach twisted with dread. She whispered to herself that she could manage, that she would figure something out. But deep down, she knew she was trapped. Her date leaned back, scrolling on his phone, not even bothering to look at her. He smirked when the waitress came by, ordering the largest steak with a side of wine, as if the night belonged entirely to him. He did not notice the way Emily's hands shook under the table. He did not care. At the next table, the man in the navy blue suit had watched long enough. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp. He did not know this woman, yet he recognized the weight pressing down on her shoulders. He had seen desperation before, in boardrooms where men lied through their teeth to save their fortunes. But there was something different here. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that did not match her circumstances. The moment the waitress returned to confirm the order, Emily panicked. She excused herself, stepping outside into the cool night air. She pressed her back against the brick wall, gripping her purse. "I cannot pay for this," she whispered to herself, shame filling her chest. The rain had begun again, light drops brushing against her hair. She thought about calling the babysitter, making up an excuse to leave. But the thought of walking back inside and facing humiliation froze her in place. The door opened. It was not her date. It was the man from the next table. He stepped into the rain, his polished shoes soaking in the puddles as if he did not care. He looked directly at her, his voice calm but commanding. "You do not have to go back in there." Emily blinked, startled. I do not know you," she stammered, clutching her purse tighter. "You do not need to," he said. "I just saw enough to know you deserve better than being treated like that." He hesitated, then added, "Come with me, just for a moment." Against her instincts, Emily followed him to the side of the diner where the rain drowned out the noise of traffic. He removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, the fabric warm despite the chill. For a brief second, she felt the weight of her fear ease. Then he said the words that would change everything. "I need someone to play a role, a wife. Just for appearances. You would not owe me anything beyond what we agree on. And in return, you would never have to worry about being humiliated like that again." Emily's breath caught. "A wife?" she repeated, her voice a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Yes," he said firmly. "A marriage on paper, nothing more. I will take care of everything else." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why me? You do not even know me." He studied her, his expression unreadable but sincere. "Because you are the only one in that room tonight who had the strength to hold her head high even when the world tried to crush her. That is exactly what I need." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. Her date was still inside, probably laughing at her absence, while this stranger, this man who carried himself with the air of power, was offering her something that sounded impossible. Her son's face flashed in her mind, the bills waiting on the kitchen table. The endless struggle of trying to make ends meet. She felt torn between fear and a strange glimmer of hope. The rain fell harder, pattering against the jacket he had placed on her shoulders. She gripped it tightly, realizing that this unexpected offer might be the only chance she had to change her life. Emily woke the next morning still doubting the events of the night before. She kept replaying his words, that impossible proposal echoing in her ears. A marriage on paper. Nothing more. She had barely slept, torn between fear of the unknown and the nagging thought that this could be the only way to protect her little boy from the hardships that had defined their lives. She stood in her modest apartment kitchen, pouring cereal into a chipped bowl for her son. The little boy's laughter filled the air as he tapped his spoon against the table. Emily forced a smile, but her mind was already racing ahead. What kind of man makes an offer like that? And why her? Later that day, she found herself stepping into a sleek black car parked outside her building. The man in the navy blue suit, whose name she now knew was Alexander, had sent it for her. She sat stiffly in the back seat, clutching her worn purse while the city streets blurred past the tinted windows. When the car stopped in front of a towering glass skyscraper, Emily felt her breath catch. The building seemed to touch the clouds, a symbol of wealth and power that could never belong to someone like her. Inside, polished marble floors stretched out beneath her shoes, and every passerby in designer suits glanced at her as though she were an intruder. She followed Alexander through the lobby, her heart pounding with every step. He led her to an office that overlooked the entire city, the kind of office that belonged to a man who controlled empires. Alexander gestured for her to sit, his tone calm but firm. "If we are going to do this, there are rules," he said. "You will live in my house. You will attend public events by my side. You will sign documents that bind us legally, but emotionally, it will remain a contract. Nothing more." "Oh." Emily's voice trembled as she asked. "And in return?" His gaze softened, just slightly. "In return, you and your son will never worry about money again. You will have security, stability, and protection." The mention of her son sent a pang through her chest. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together, trying to imagine what life would look like inside a mansion instead of her cramped apartment. But then she thought of the cost, her freedom, her pride, the risk of binding herself to a man she barely knew. The contract was placed in front of her, the black ink crisp against the heavy paper. Alexander handed her a pen. "You have a choice," he said quietly. "Walk away, and I will never bother you again. Or sign and step into a different life." Emily stared at the lines of text. Every word screamed that this was wrong, unnatural, even dangerous. And yet, the thought of her son's small hands reaching for food she sometimes struggled to provide weighed heavier than her fear. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. She hesitated, then signed her name. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper felt final, like a door slamming shut behind her. Alexander took the contract, his expression unreadable. "From this moment," he said, "we are bound." The next days blurred into a whirlwind. Emily and her son were moved into his estate, a sprawling mansion with rooms larger than her entire apartment. She wandered through polished hallways, her footsteps echoing, feeling both awestruck and out of place. Staff greeted her politely, though some eyes lingered with suspicion. She had to remind herself over and over, this is not real, this is only an act. But reality pressed close. At their first public dinner, cameras flashed as Alexander's arm slipped around her shoulders. His touch was steady, his smile convincing, while she forced herself to play the role of a devoted wife. Each polite laugh and graceful nod drained her, but she knew the performance was necessary. As the night went on, Emily caught her reflection in the mirrored wall of the ballroom. Dressed in silk, wearing borrowed diamonds, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Beneath the glittering facade, her heart whispered the truth: she was living someone else's life. A life that came with invisible chains. And yet, as Alexander leaned close to whisper instructions for the next toast, she felt the strange warmth of his breath on her ear. For a fleeting second, she wondered if the contract might not stay just a contract forever. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and exhausting for Emily. She woke each morning in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, sunlight streaming through tall windows framed by velvet curtains. Staff members brought breakfast on silver trays, though she still longed for the simplicity of pouring cereal for her son at their old kitchen table. Life inside Alexander's mansion was polished and orchestrated. Yet beneath the grandeur, Emily struggled to remember that all of this was supposed to be an act. At first, she kept her distance from him. Alexander remained composed, focused on his endless calls and meetings. But in the evenings, when they were required to attend social gatherings, their paths intertwined more than she expected. One night, at a charity gala, she stood at his side while photographers crowded around them. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, guiding her through the chaos. "Smile," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Emily lifted her chin and obeyed, forcing her lips into a graceful curve. Yet in that moment, she realized how steadying his touch felt, how it grounded her amidst the flashing lights. Back at the mansion, she tried to shake off that strange sensation. It was easy to remind herself this was only a contract. Still, she could not forget the way Alexander's gaze softened for a split second when her son showed him a drawing at breakfast, or how he had discreetly pulled out a chair for her at a luncheon while others barely acknowledged her presence. These small gestures gnawed at her resolve. Her heart wavered further one late afternoon. She had wandered into the garden, where roses climbed up stone walls and fountains whispered with falling water. Emily thought she was alone, until she saw Alexander standing by the terrace, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked less like the powerful businessman, and more like a man carrying invisible burdens. She froze when his eyes lifted and met hers. "You should not be out here alone," he said quietly, walking toward her. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to remind him that they were not truly husband and wife, that he had no reason to worry about her, but the concern in his eyes silenced her protest. For the first time, they sat together away from the crowd. Alexander spoke little, yet she sensed the heaviness in him. And when he finally admitted, "This arrangement was supposed to protect me from my family's control, but sometimes I wonder if I am the one trapped," Emily's chest tightened. She had not expected honesty from him. That night, lying awake in her luxurious bed, Emily could not stop replaying their conversation. The walls she had built around her heart trembled. She thought of how he had noticed her strength that first night in the diner, how he had chosen her not because she fit into his world, but because she stood apart from it. The next evening, their roles as a married couple were tested again. At a formal dinner, one of Alexander's business rivals made a cutting remark about their marriage, insinuating that it was nothing more than a desperate arrangement. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. Before she could even respond, Alexander's voice cut through the laughter. "My wife is the reason I walk into every battle with my head held high," he declared, his eyes never leaving hers. The room fell silent, and for an instant, Emily forgot this was a performance. She felt the sincerity in his words, whether rehearsed or not. Her heart pounded, her thoughts tangled between doubt and an unfamiliar warmth. As they left the dinner, Alexander offered his arm. Emily hesitated, then slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither spoke, a current of unspoken understanding passed between them. For the first time since signing the contract, Emily wondered if her role as a wife was becoming less of an act and more of a truth she had not dared to hope for. The shift between them did not go unnoticed. As days passed, Emily found herself watching Alexander more closely, and she realized that others were watching her just as intently. The mansion's staff whispered when they thought she was out of earshot. At public events, curious eyes lingered on them longer than before, as if waiting for the cracks to appear. Whispers soon grew into direct challenges. At a luncheon filled with investors, one of Alexander's relatives leaned across the table and spoke with sharp precision. "We all know why she is here. A single mother from nowhere suddenly living in a mansion? Do you expect us to believe this is real?" The room chuckled cruelly. Emily's hand froze on her glass of water. Before she could retreat into silence, Alexander's voice cut through the air. "Careful," he warned, his tone icy. "You may question me, but you will not insult my wife." His words silenced the table, but the sting of humiliation burned in Emily's chest. Later that evening, Emily confronted him in the privacy of the garden. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Defending me in front of them like that only makes them doubt more. They will dig deeper now." Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. "Let them," he said. "I meant every word." Her heart raced, but she forced herself to look away. It was dangerous to believe in his sincerity, yet the warmth in his tone lingered long after the conversation ended. The pressure only mounted when his former fiancée reappeared. A woman polished and elegant, she visited the mansion under the pretense of friendship. Emily watched the way she smiled too sweetly at Alexander, the way she ignored Emily's presence entirely. Each calculated word was designed to remind Emily that she did not belong. That night, Emily sat by her son's bed after he had fallen asleep, her thoughts heavy. She had promised herself she would not let emotions complicate this arrangement. But jealousy clawed at her, sharper than she expected. She hated how much it hurt to imagine Alexander returning to the arms of someone from his world. The next morning, the tension reached a breaking point. Headlines appeared online, fueled by paparazzi photographs and whispers from insiders. The articles questioned their marriage, labeling it a desperate contract. They mocked Emily's background, portraying her as a gold digger who had trapped a wealthy man. Emily's chest tightened as she read the cruel words. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Yet when she looked at her son playing on the living room floor, she knew she could not crumble. He needed her strength. Later that day, she found Alexander in his office, standing rigid by the window as the city stretched beneath him. His expression was hard, his jaw set. "They are coming after you now," he said. "And it is my fault." Emily shook her head. "No. It was always going to be like this. I am the weak link in your perfect world. They will never accept me." He turned sharply, his eyes burning with intensity. "You are not the weak link," he said firmly. "You are the only part of this arrangement that feels real." His words left her breathless. Yet even as her heart longed to believe them, doubt gnawed at her. Because deep down, she feared that sooner or later, the truth of their contract would be exposed, and the fragile bond they were building would shatter. The storm finally broke on a night that was supposed to be perfect. Alexander had arranged a dinner at the mansion, inviting his closest allies and family members in an effort to quiet the whispers about their marriage. Emily wore a gown chosen for her by his staff, her hair styled to perfection, every detail intended to prove that she belonged at his side. For the first hour, it almost worked. She smiled politely, answered questions with grace, and leaned into the role she had promised to play. But then the trap was sprung. A rival businessman, one who had long resented Alexander's success, stood with a glass of wine in hand and delivered a toast laced with poison. To Alexander and his wife. May their marriage last longer than the contract that brought them together. The room erupted in murmurs. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted to Alexander, searching for reassurance, but he remained stone-faced. The rival continued, waving a folder of documents. "These papers," he declared, "prove that your marriage is nothing but a signed agreement." A lie. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as faces turned toward her, eyes filled with judgment and triumph. She felt the walls closing in, every insecurity she had fought to hide now dragged into the light. Without a word, she pushed back her chair and fled the room. She barely registered the gasps behind her as she ran down the hallway, tears blurring her vision. Her heels clattered against the marble floor until she reached the quiet of her bedroom. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, clutching her son's small toy in her hand, her body shaking with humiliation. Minutes later, Alexander found her. He stepped into the room, his voice low. "Emily." She looked up, her eyes red. "Was it true? Did they get those papers because of you? Was this always just a game to you?" Alexander's face tightened. "I never wanted it to come out like this." Her voice broke as she whispered, "So it is true. Everything they said out there. I was nothing more than a pawn." He moved closer, but she pulled back, shaking her head. "Do not," she said sharply. "Do not tell me you care when all along I was nothing but a convenient choice." The pain in his eyes was unmistakable, but she could not allow herself to believe it. Her pride, her dignity, demanded she put distance between them. That night, Emily packed a small bag for herself and her son. She could not stay in a house where she was the object of ridicule, where her heart was breaking under the weight of lies. As dawn broke, she slipped out quietly, leaving behind the mansion, the contract, and the man who had made her believe, even for a moment, that she could belong in his world. In the empty halls of the estate, Alexander stood alone, the silence pressing in on him. He had gained everything the contract was supposed to provide: control, stability, victory over his family's demands. And yet, watching her walk away, he realized he had lost the only thing that had begun to feel real. Emily returned to the small apartment she had once called home, her son asleep in her arms as she unlocked the door. The peeling paint on the walls and the creak of the floorboards felt strangely comforting after the cold perfection of Alexander's mansion. She laid her boy gently on the bed and sat in the dim light, her chest aching with both relief and despair. She told herself she had done the right thing. She had walked away before the lies consumed her completely. But as the days passed, a hollow emptiness grew inside her. The security she had briefly known was gone. Bills piled on the kitchen counter again. And every time she looked at her son, she wondered if she had made a mistake by leaving. The memory of Alexander's voice, the warmth of his defense, haunted her. She wanted to hate him, but her heart betrayed her. Meanwhile, Alexander was unraveling in his own way. His boardroom victories felt hollow, his mansion echoing with silence. He replayed the dinner in his mind 100 times, cursing himself for not protecting her, for allowing his rival's poison to reach her ears. He knew he had to face the truth not only with her, but with himself. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, Alexander appeared at Emily's apartment. The sight of him standing in the narrow hallway, out of place in his tailored suit, startled her. She opened the door only halfway, her voice guarded. "Why are you here?" He swallowed hard. "Because I cannot let you believe that all of this was a lie. Yes, it started as a contract. I will not deny that. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about signatures and agreements. It became about you." Emily shook her head, her hand tightening on the door. "Do not say that. Do not make it harder for me. I saw the papers, Alexander. I heard the words. You let them humiliate me." Pain flickered in his eyes. "I made mistakes. I thought I could control everything, protect you by keeping the truth hidden, but I was wrong. And now, if I lose you, then every deal I ever made means nothing." Tears burned in her eyes, but she stood firm. "I cannot let my son grow up watching me live in a world built on lies. He deserves better than that. Alexander's voice broke as he whispered, "So do you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Emily closed the door gently, leaning her forehead against the wood, her heart shattering all over again. Alexander remained in the hallway, staring at the closed door, knowing that if he wanted to win her back, he would have to prove his love not with contracts or wealth, but with actions that could not be questioned. Alexander did not walk away from that closed door with defeat. Instead, he carried with him a determination that burned brighter than any ambition he had ever known. For the first time in his life, business deals and family expectations no longer mattered. What mattered was proving to Emily that his love was real, that she and her son were not pawns in a game, but the only truth he wanted to hold on to. The very next morning, the city woke to shocking news. Headlines splashed across every outlet. Alexander Hayes rejects family fortune. At a press conference, Alexander stood before flashing cameras, his voice steady. "Yes, my marriage began as an arrangement," he confessed. "But what grew from it was not a contract, it was love. And if my family, my rivals, or anyone else believes otherwise, then they can take my fortune, my inheritance, and every title attached to my name. I will not give up the woman who has shown me what strength and kindness truly mean." The declaration sent shockwaves through the room. Reporters shouted questions, board members gaped in disbelief, and his relatives sat in stunned silence. But Alexander did not waver. He had chosen his path, and it was one that no contract could dictate. Meanwhile, Emily heard the broadcast on a small television in her apartment. Her hands trembled as she watched Alexander renounce everything he had been raised to protect. He looked different on that screen, freer, lighter, more human. She could not stop the tears that filled her eyes. For the first time, she saw not the powerful businessman who had swept her into a gilded cage, but the man who was willing to break those bars for her. That evening, Alexander came to her again. This time, when she opened the door, there was no suit, no entourage, no polished mask. He stood there in a simple shirt, rain clinging to his hair, his eyes searching hers with raw honesty. "I gave it all up," he said quietly. "Not to prove something to the world, to prove it to you. Because you and your son are my world now. If you never come back to me, I will still know I chose the right path. But if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life showing you that my love is not bound by any contract." Emily's heart twisted as she stared at him, torn between the fear of being hurt again and the undeniable truth of what he had done. Her son peeked from behind her, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom, is he staying?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked from her boy to Alexander. The choice that had once seemed impossible now felt clear. For the first time since this strange journey began, hope stirred in her chest. Emily stood in the doorway, her son's question echoing in her ears. She looked at Alexander, standing there drenched in rain but unshaken in his resolve. For so long, she had feared that everything between them was built on lies. Yet now, faced with the man who had given up everything just to prove his heart, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She stepped aside, allowing him into the small apartment. Alexander glanced around the modest space, so different from the mansion he had left behind. But his expression held no judgment. Instead, his eyes softened as they landed on the little boy clutching a toy car. He crouched down and offered a small smile. "I would like to stay, if that is all right with both of you." The boy's face lit up, and Emily felt her breath catch. It was not wealth, it was not power, it was not contracts that her son longed for. It was family. Later that evening, they sat together at the tiny kitchen table. Emily brewed coffee, while Alexander helped her son with a puzzle. The scene was simple, ordinary, yet it carried more weight than any grand ballroom or glittering gala. Emily realized then that love was not about perfection or appearances. Love was about showing up, about sacrifice, about choosing each other again and again despite the odds. Alexander reached across the table, taking Emily's trembling hand in his. "No more contracts, no more pretenses. I love you, and I will spend every day proving that, if you let me." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not born of sorrow. "I never wanted your fortune," she whispered. "I only ever wanted something real. And now, for the first time, I believe it is possible." Uh, Her son looked between them, his innocent smile sealing the moment. So, does this mean we are a family now? He asked softly. Emily laughed through her tears and nodded. Yes, sweetheart, we are a family. Alexander pulled them both into his arms, holding them tightly as if he would never let go. The rain outside tapped against the window, but inside that small apartment, there was only warmth. The story that had begun with a desperate blind date and a $5 bill ended not in contracts or scandals, but in love that no wealth could ever buy. Emily had found her place, not in Alexander's mansion, but in his heart. And for Alexander, the empire he had once clung to meant nothing compared to the joy of coming home to the woman and child who had taught him the true meaning of family. It was not a fairy tale ending of riches and crowns. It was something better. It was love made real, tested by fire, and proven by sacrifice. And as Emily leaned into Alexander's embrace, she knew she had finally found not just a husband, but a partner who would stand by her side for the rest of her life.